Estás viendo Canal América, televisión dominicana para el mundo.
Time for Truth Show is sponsored by the Office of Dr. Bernard Fialkoff, a periodontal, dental implant and laser specialist in New York City, for over 40 years. Dr. Fialkoff was honored by the International College of Dentists and Pierre Fauchard, and received the Presidential Lifetime Humanitarian Honor from the White House. Call us at 718-229-3838.
Sometimes life can be so damn hard. You don't know where to go. Everything keeps falling apart. Yeah. You try to do your best, but only God knows that you've given everything you've got, but the world lets you down. You just keep moving on. Let your fears.
Welcome to a Time for Truth show. I'm your host, Dr. Bernard Fialkoff, and I welcome you back. And tonight's show, we're going to talk about what's going on in our world. You know, we have a lot of complaints. We don't like the way things are going. We want things to go in the right direction. And why are they going in the wrong direction? And let's take a look at this, and let's start with the first image engineer, and let's put it on for our viewers. And we will start with first looking at what are the common complaints that we have all across our country, and then what is behind this. Okay, so the major complaints are that, well, you know, with cars, automobiles, something that we need, and they cost much more than what we thought, than what was advertised. Before the financing is completed, the person, in some instances, is obtaining the car, but then the financing is changing or something is different, and now they have to renegotiate, but it's not what they thought. And, you know, they're almost forced into it because otherwise the car is going to get repossessed. Another one that's very important that we can't live without is some place to live. And so we get upset when we get large rent increases, and or we move and we don't get back our security, or we get charged some fee that doesn't seem right because we left the apartment in a good position. And we go to the next image, and we use a contractor, and he seems like a good guy, so we feel like we want to be fair. We pay him a down payment, and the next thing you know, he doesn't show up, or he doesn't really complete the job. He starts and he leaves, he comes, he leaves, and you're left with a half-done job, and you've paid him the whole bill. Another one is, unfortunately, increasing in today's world, is scamming by email, by text messages, that you won something, you won a prize, congratulations, and they're fraud. They try to get your identity, they try to get your credit card number, you get fraudulent billing, fraudulent charges, and that's been ever increasing. Your identity can be stolen. You know, a check can be forged. They can actually take a check out of the mail and forge the check, and now you're out that money. Healthcare with a quality of service that, you know, is very important, obviously, because now we're talking about our lives, our wellness, and we're not happy with the service that we're getting. Or another one is you get all these robocalls, you get all these automated calls, and it drives you crazy. It interrupts you in the middle of the day. You think it's an important call, and you take it, and they're trying to sell you something. or they tell you that your bill is overdue when you've paid it. How do we resolve this? What are we going to do so this is not something that's going to get worse in our society? Because obviously it's not something that's good. It's very frustrating. It causes a lot of negative emotions, a lot of negative energy, stress. It's not good for your health. It's not good for your relationships. So let's talk about something important that sometimes we don't look at it because we think we live in a civilization. We're in a modern civilization. But what does that mean? What does it mean to be civilized? Well, to be civilized would be to have a humane culture. What is humane? Humane is doing for someone else what you really want for yourself. You want to be well taken care of. You want to buy something and know that it's going to work. You want to show up at an appointment and the person's going to be there. You get your car back after it's repaired and it works. It doesn't have another problem. Or now you have to take more time from work. It's being polite. Not polite because you want to have good manners, but polite because you realize that the other person is actually doing something for you. That it's not by chance that you have lights, that you have gasoline, that the supermarket has the food that you want, that there are paper goods, that there's soap. You could look with COVID recently, in the last few years, how the chips that were being used electronically in the cars weren't anywhere to be found. No one had thought about that. And we actually had a shortage of cars for a good period of time during COVID. We want to educate against ignorance. Why? Because if we forget what is important, if we ignore the environment, we live off of the environment. We need fresh water. We need clean air. We need the ground to be able to sustain crops and things that we need to sustain us nutritionally. We can't have the ground be destroyed and depleted by people who are ignorant of humanity. They're not being polite to the world. We want to be involved in things that are easy to manage. We don't want complications. We want things to flow. With agreement, there's flows. With complications, there's upsets, disturbances, there's war. That's what happens when things are not well managed and when they're not coordinated. So we want to be organized. We want to be well ordered, well coordinated. It's not something just nice to do because it's written in a book somewhere. It has to do with the realities of life. And so I wanted to make this show very real because otherwise it seems very either didactic or professorial or like something you read out of the Ten Commandments. Let's be real, but let's actually take a look at how life actually exists and not think because we've increased into the usage of cell phones, computers, technology, that we can subsist without food. Because you can't eat these, you can't eat computers. A car will not sustain you when you're thirsty, when you're hungry, when you need health care, when you need someone's help. So we need to be coordinated and we need to be real. We can't forget how we've gotten to the level in our society that we have. And this is why we need to be civilized. So let's go to the next slide. And let's talk about something in terms of civilization that sometimes we forget. What made famous athletes so popular is that they produced. How did they produce? Well, they played basketball better than the others, and their team won all the NBA championships. Or they were the best at three-point shots. Or they hit the most home runs. Or they were the best quarterback, and their team won the Super Bowl and would always win. And I don't want to mention any names because I want to make this more humanity. The names we all know, and I could give you the names, but I don't want to, market names. I want to make this more for all of us as individuals, as human beings. And when those famous athletes did very well, they got recompensed very well also. But they entertained, they produced, they were at a high level. So they deserved to have that. It's not that they had to be criticized or they had to be taxed at a higher rate, because how could that actually be a proper recompense for someone to went to that extreme? And we also don't want to punish people who produce, because if you look at farmers who are out in the fields, out in the cold and the hot and the rain, in the elements, they deserve to be recompensed, because let's say the farmers decided to go on strike. People would starve to death. We never think about that, but we have to be polite to agricultural sector of our society and realize that they're good people. They're producing, and they create the morale that we have in the world, because if people are hungry, they get irritated, they fight with each other, and there's not morale in the world. So producing is morale, but producing is producing something of value. Because if you produce something and it's not of value, what substance does it have? What benefit did someone have that you sold them something, and sure, you made money, you gained in a selfish perspective, but in terms of the community, if you sold something on Facebook or the internet or Twitter or TikTok or whatever, on Google, on any platform, and whatever you sold had no value, so that supposed air conditioner that cost only $30, it was supposed to cool the whole room, was actually a fraud and a scam, you're going to have a lot of upset people who may have wasted money that they needed to buy something else, or maybe needed to actually cool a room where their kids had to sleep, and now they've wasted that money. It's not a light thing to look at. It's called criminality. What is criminality? Criminality is more than just mugging somebody. It's stealing and not producing. It's living off of somebody else's production. No one likes to be used like a horse, like a mule, like an ox to pull a cart. But if we don't like that, then we have to take a look. The criminality is of the same type. It's using another human being. It's making that other human being seem like they're some kind of animal. They're devoid of rights. They don't have civil rights. They don't have human rights. They don't have any rights. They're just supposed to work. But oh my God, if the person who espouses that philosophy has to work themselves, all of a sudden you see how it changes. So criminality is producing what each one of us would consider fair. I think the world has lost their ability to see that what's fair is what's important. Let's go to the next slide, as we said, and we're going to look at nature. We're going to look at a very simple example. We're going to look at simplicities that can be expounded and extrapolated from. An apple tree. Well, an apple tree has to grow from a seed. And so life is a circle of life. You know, the seed makes a seedling, the tree starts to grow, it grows into a tree, the tree flowers, the flowers get pollinated, the tree continues to grow, and then as it reaches a certain point, the apple tree begins to give fruit. That fruit then has seeds and can keep going in this circle. But is it just the apple tree alone? And let's say that apple trees somehow could determine things that could have criminality. Could they survive alone? Could they just rob from the environment and not produce apples? Or the apples that they produced had no nutritional value? Would that be something we'd be very happy about? Well, you're probably all laughing as I'm saying this, but I'm going to bring up something to you that you may not realize, but apple trees by themselves, even without the farmer, even without the fertilizer, cannot grow by themselves, even with the sun, with the water, because they need another life form. And this is something talking about civilization, coordination. And let's go to the next slide, because you may not have realized it, but we have another sector of what's called a dynamic of life, or a sector of life, the insects. Now, how is this? Well, you probably realized, because you realize that bees pollinate, but you may not have realized that apple trees also have flowers, and that the bees pollinate from one apple tree to another, so that the trees can be fertilized by the pollination. of the bee or of certain insects. And what happens is now that tree will produce fruit, something you may not have realized. So we could say that the bees are going to go on strike and they're not going to produce anymore because they're very upset. Or they get very selfish and the bees figure out a way how to get the pollen, because the reason the bees do this is that the pollen has protein and the nectars have energy, and the bees use that. It's like their gas station. But nature made it so that there's a circle. So the bee is interchanging with the apple tree. There's a coordination. And if either one of these is gone, then you don't have fruit from the apple tree. And if the bees disappear, soon you won't have apple trees. And really, if you realize recently that bees are starting to be extinct, we're concerned that the bees may become extinct. But maybe a lot of people have never even realized that it leads to the foods that they depend on, or the fruits or the flowers that they depend on. So it's very interesting how nature set it up, because you have this interchange and you have this civilization between the plant kingdom and the insect kingdom. Let's go on. Now, so there you see how the honeybees are very essential to the apple orchard. 90% of the crops are pollinated in the United States. Let's go on to the next slide. And what happens? Well, I don't know about you, but I love red apples. I actually like the Macintosh the best, but they're out of season right now. But you can see here that those apples, through the harmony of the insect kingdom, of the plant kingdom, are feeding us, human beings. I don't know if you want to consider us the animal kingdom or the spiritual kingdom of humanity. But without that food, there would be no humanity. People would have hunger. There would be famine. People would start fighting over the food. Probably war would start over food. And not money, not gold, not buildings, but food. A basic substance that's very necessary to life, the essence of life, because you can't live if you can't eat. This is one of these stupid simplicities that we sometimes forget in the technological world that we have. In outer space, you can go up in a spaceship, you can come back down, but if there's no food on that spaceship, you'll expire on the spaceship. Let's go to the next slide. And you see here another beautiful thing, and you can see just looking at it, exudes positive energy. Very simple. This little boy helping an older woman across the street. Next slide. But we have criminality. But for right now, let's look at this, the happiness. Why was that little boy happy? Why were those young kids happy eating the apples? Why was the bee happy? Why was the apple tree happy, which continued to give more and more fruit? Because there was survival. The products that were being produced, the effects that were being produced, led to more survival, led to mutual survival, not to war, not to greed, not to just having a lot of money in a bank account or being able not to work when you retire, but led to survival of a community, of a race. Do we have any debt for what was given to us? I think we do. So production is the basis of morale, but what happens if you start producing things and creating things that are not positive? Let's take a look at it. Buddha, let's go to the next slide. Let's take a look at criminality. Well, again, this is a positive one. Let's go on. Let's look at criminality. Next slide. Criminality. Not producing, but robbing and stealing somebody else's production. You may say, well, how is a inferior product criminality? Because you're robbing that person of their money because you're not exchanging something they need. When a car is sold for too high a value, you're stealing that worker's money. You're causing stress in that family. The parents can't be home. They need to go out and produce. But when inflation hits, they don't have time to be with their families. But is that good for the culture, or is that increasing the violence we see, the social unrest that we see, the racial interactions that we see where people are very upset with one another and are looking to solve these problems. Let's go on. Yes, this is a creation. It's a criminal creation. He's gotten very adept. He's very competent at stealing. But is that good for our world? Next slide. And when we go into very severe and extreme cases, we have what happens in wars. We have prison camps where we even imprison children. What have the children done? What kind of product is this? But when you have a world that has lost sight of the products that they're producing, when you have criminal exchange, when it's not fair exchange, what starts occurring, prices go up, inflation goes up. Why? Because nothing of value is being produced. What is inflation but not having enough products? But if you have inferior products, you're going to have inflation because the product is valueless. We need to wake up. We need to take a look and realize that the violence in the subways, the prejudices, the drug usage, the unhappiness can be solved very simply by taking care of one another, by taking care of the world, not to be altruistic, but to be realistic and to be able to survive, realizing that your survival depends on the whole community, not that just somehow you were the best in the world and you figured out how to market so you could take advantage of things. That's not optimum survival. So let's take a look at a video, and I want to show you what happens when survival is not looked at and then when it's finally looked at. Let's look at this video from something called the Way to Happiness International. Let's put the video on, Buddha.
15. Fulfill your obligations. In going through life, one inevitably incurs obligations. Factually, one is born with certain obligations, and they tend to accumulate thereafter. It is no novel or new idea that one owes his parents a debt for bringing one into the world, for raising one. It is a credit to parents that they don't push it any harder than they do, but it is an obligation nevertheless. Even the child feels it. And as life continues to run its course, one accumulates other obligations to other persons, to friends, to society, and even the world. It is an extreme disservice to a person not to permit him to satisfy or pay off his obligations. No small part of the revolt of childhood is caused by others refusing to accept the only coins a baby or child or youth has with which to discharge the weight of obligation. The baby's smiles, the child's fumbling efforts to help, the youth's possible advice, or just the effort to be a good son or a good daughter commonly pass unrecognized, unaccepted. They can be ill-aimed, often ill-planned. They fade quickly. Such efforts, when they fail to discharge the enormity of the debt, can be replaced with any number of mechanisms or rationalizations. One doesn't really owe anything. I was owed it all in the first place. I didn't ask to be born. My parents or guardians are no good. And life isn't worth living anyway, to name a few. And yet, the obligations continue to pile up. The weight of obligation can be a crushing burden if one can see no way to discharge it. It can bring about all manner of individual or social disorders. When it cannot be discharged, those who are owed, often unwittingly, find themselves targets for the most unlooked-for reactions. One can help a person who finds himself in the dilemma of unpaid obligations and debt by simply going over with him or her all the obligations they have incurred and have not fulfilled, moral, social, and financial, and work out some way to discharge all of those the person feels are still owed. one should accept the efforts of a child or an adult to pay off non-financial obligations they feel they may owe. One should help bring about some mutually agreeable solution to the discharge of financial ones. Discourage a person from incurring more obligations than it is possible for him or her to actually discharge or repay. The way to happiness is very hard to travel when one is burdened with the weight of obligations which one is owed or which he has not discharged.
So we go to the next slide. And whose choice is it? Who determines? Well, the choice is ours. Do we go through the doorway? We go into a colored, vivid, happy world? Or we stay in darkness, in gray, in shadows? And what is the solution? Probably was too simple to ever see. And that's basically producing something of value so that the other people who depend on you can also be happy, realizing that they can trust you. And then they, in turn, by your example, also produce something of value and realize that they want to help you to survive. It sounds too simplistic, but if you look at our world, what is the violence, the drugging, the homelessness, but really the consequence of our inability to have humanity, to be civilized? Yes, we have technology. Yes, we have intellectual ways of marketing and controlling others. But if we eliminate humanity and you are left only with gold and buildings and technology, and you think of some of the movies that I'll remain nameless that talk about the future controlled by robots and machines with a few men, you realize that unfortunately it could become true. So it's time for us to awaken. It's time for us to realize how much we owe each other. We all owe each other because we're all surviving together as humanity. I hope you've enjoyed this show and that you actually apply it and see if you're not happier, have a higher morale, and actually have much better life around you. Try it and see. We'll see you next time on the next episode of A Time for Truth show. Good night.
This show was sponsored by A Time for Truth Foundation Incorporated as a community service.
Sometimes life can be so damn hard. You don't know where to go. Everything keeps falling apart. Yeah. You try to do your best, but only God knows that you've given everything you've got, but the world takes you down. You just keep moving on. Let your feet